The moment Harlan Wright saw the blood trail leading through his wheat field, he knew his quiet life was about to end. He stood at the edge of his property, dawn light just beginning to touch the golden stalks that swayed in the morning breeze. The trail was fresh, dark droplets staining the dirt path that wound between the rows. His hand went instinctively to the old sword he kept at his hip, more habit than fear. 15 years since he'd left the king's army, but some reflexes never faded. He followed the trail with careful steps, his eyes scanning the field for movement. The blood led to his barn. Harlan approached slowly, listening. Inside, he could hear labored breathing, the kind that came from someone trying to stay quiet despite pain. He pushed the barn door open just wide enough to slip through, letting his eyes adjust to the dimness. In the far corner, huddled against a stack of hay bales, was a figure, an orc. A woman, he realized after a moment. She was curled on her side, one hand pressed against her ribs where blood seeped between her fingers. Her skin was the deep green of forest moss, and her dark hair was matted with sweat and dirt. Small tusks protruded from her lower jaw, and her pointed ears twitched at the sound of his footsteps. Her eyes, bright amber and fierce, despite her obvious pain, fixed on him with a mixture of defiance and desperate resignation. "If you have come to finish what they started," she said, her voice rough but steady, "then do it quickly." Harlan didn't move for a long moment. He'd fought orcs during the border wars, seen what they could do in battle. He'd also seen what humans did to orcs they captured. Neither side had clean hands when it came to that old conflict. He looked at the wound in her side, the way she held herself, and made a decision that he knew would change everything. "I am not going to finish anything," he said, setting his sword down against the wall. "But if you do not let me look at that wound, you are going to bleed out in my barn." She blinked, surprise flickering across her face before suspicion took its place. "Why would you help me?" "Because I have seen enough death to last several lifetimes." He moved slowly toward her, hands visible and empty. "My name is Harlan. I used to be a soldier, which means I know how to patch wounds. Let me help." She watched him approach like a cornered animal might watch a predator. When he knelt beside her, she flinched but didn't pull away. Up close, he could see how young she was, probably no more than 20. Her breathing was shallow, and her skin had taken on a grayish tinge beneath the green. "I need to see the wound," he said gently. After a moment's hesitation, she moved her hand. The gash across her ribs was deep, the work of a blade rather than claws or teeth. Harlan had seen hundreds of wounds like this. Someone had tried to gut her, and she'd been lucky or skilled enough to avoid the worst of it. "This needs to be cleaned and stitched," he told her. "It will hurt. Everything hurts already." There was bitter humor in her voice. "What is a little more?" He retrieved his medical supplies from the house, another remnant of his military days that he'd never quite abandoned. When he returned, she was exactly where he'd left her, though her eyes had closed. For a moment he feared she'd passed out, but they opened again when he set the kit down. "What is your name?" he asked as he began cleaning the wound. She hissed at the sting of the alcohol but didn't pull away. "Grisha," she said through gritted teeth. "How did this happen, Grisha?" She was silent for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, "I was traveling alone." "Foolish, I know. A group of human hunters found me. They said there was sport in hunting orcs who wandered too far from their clans. When I fought back and killed one of them, the others called for the local militia. I have been running for 2 days. Harlan's jaw tightened as he worked. He knew the type of men she meant. The war had been over for a decade, but hatred didn't end with treaties. Some people needed an enemy, and orcs made convenient targets in these borderlands. "They will not stop looking," Grisha continued, watching his face. "There will be a bounty on me now for killing a human. When they find me here, they will kill you too for harboring an enemy. Then we had better make sure you are healed enough to move before they arrive, Harlan said, threading his needle. You do not understand. They will come. Today, tomorrow. You should turn me in and collect the bounty yourself. It would be the sensible thing. He met her eyes as he made the first stitch. I stopped doing the sensible thing the day I bought this farm and left the army. Now hold still. She gritted her teeth as he worked, her hands fisting in the hay beneath her. To her credit, she didn't cry out, though he saw the pain in every line of her body. When he finished, he wrapped her ribs with clean bandages and sat back. You need rest and food, he said. There is a loft above. It will be more comfortable than the floor, and you can see anyone approaching. Why are you doing this? Grisha asked again, and this time there was something besides suspicion in her voice. Confusion, perhaps, or the beginning of hope. Because someone should, Harlan said simply. He stood and offered her his hand. After a moment, she took it, and he helped her to her feet. She swayed, and he steadied her with a hand on her shoulder. Even injured, she was nearly his height, with a warrior's build that spoke of strength and training. He guided her to the ladder leading to the loft. She climbed slowly, each movement clearly painful, but she made it. Up in the loft, he'd stored extra blankets and hay for the coldest months. He spread them out to make a bed while she watched. I will bring you food and water, he said. Try to sleep. Your body needs it to heal. Harlan. He paused at the top of the ladder, looking back at her. She was sitting on the makeshift bed, one hand pressed to her bandaged ribs. Thank you. He nodded and descended the ladder, leaving her to rest. Back in his house, Harlan prepared a simple meal of bread, cheese, and dried meat. He added a waterskin and carried it all back to the barn. Grisha was lying down when he climbed back up, but her eyes were open, tracking his movements. Eat, he said, setting the food beside her. You have lost blood. You need your strength. She pulled herself upright with obvious effort and began eating. He noticed she did so with deliberate care, as if rationing despite her obvious hunger. Another sign of someone who'd learned to survive on the run. Tell me about this farm, she said between bites. You live here alone? I do. I bought it after leaving the king's service. The land is good and most of my neighbors keep to themselves. Quiet life, peaceful. Until today. Until today, he agreed. You were a soldier. It wasn't a question. You fought in the border wars. I did. Against my people. Yes. He saw no point in lying. I was young and believed what I was told, that orcs were monsters who wanted to destroy humanity. It took me years to understand that soldiers on both sides were just following orders, fighting for land and survival. By the time I learned that truth, I'd seen too much death to want any part of it anymore. Grisha studied him with those sharp amber eyes. Most humans do not come to that realization. Most humans do not spend 15 years killing in the name of kings who feast while their soldiers starve. She almost smiled at that, a quick quirk of her lips that showed the edge of her tusks. You are bitter. I am realistic. He stood to leave. Rest now. I will check on you this evening. What if they come before then? Harlan paused at the ladder. Then I will deal with them. He spent the day working his fields as he always did, though his mind was far from the wheat and vegetables he tended. Every sound made him look up, expecting to see riders approaching. But the day remained quiet, just the rustle of wind through crops and the distant call of birds. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Harlan finished his work and headed back to the barn. He found Grisha sitting up in the loft, looking out through a gap in the boards. The sunset, she said without looking at him. It is beautiful here, peaceful. You should be resting, he said, climbing up beside her. I have rested all day. Any more and I will go mad. She turned to face him, and he saw that color had returned to her face. The gray pallor was gone, replaced by healthy green. "Your stitching is good. The pain is already less. You heal quickly. Orc constitution. We are hard to kill." There was pride in her voice, but also weariness. Though lately it seems like many are trying their best. Harlan sat down across from her, his back against a support post. "Tell me about your clan." "Will they be looking for you?" Her expression darkened. "I have no clan." "Everyone has a clan, not me, not anymore." She looked away, back toward the sunset. "I was cast out 6 months ago." "For what?" "For showing mercy." Her voice was flat, but he heard the pain beneath it. "We raided a human settlement during the last days of the war before the treaty was signed. There was a child, no more than 5 years old, hiding in a root cellar. My clan wanted to kill her to send a message. I refused. When the clan chief ordered me to do it, I stood between them and the child. They cast me out for defying orders and showing weakness." Harlan felt a tightness in his chest. "You saved the child." "I did. I carried her to the next human village and left her where she would be found. Then I walked away from the only family I had ever known." She looked at him, and there was steel in her gaze. "I do not regret it. I would make the same choice again, but it has been lonely, wandering with no place to belong." "I understand that feeling," Harlan said quietly. They sat in silence for a while, watching the last of the sunlight fade. Finally, Harlan stood and stretched. "I will make dinner. Come to the house." Grisha blinked in surprise. "Your house?" "Unless you prefer eating in the barn, but I have a table and chairs, and the food will be hot." "Harlan, if anyone sees, there is no one to see for 3 miles in any direction. Come." She followed him across the yard to the small farmhouse. It was modest, 2 rooms and a loft for sleeping, but well maintained. Harlan lit lamps against the growing darkness and stirred the fire in the hearth back to life. He'd already prepared a stew earlier in the day, and it needed only heating. Grisha stood in the doorway, looking around the space with careful attention. Harlan wondered what she saw: the worn but comfortable furniture, the neat kitchen, the weapons mounted on the wall that he'd kept from his army days. Not trophies, just tools he couldn't quite let go of. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the table. She did, moving carefully. The wound was healing, but it would be days before she could move without pain. He ladled stew into bowls and set one in front of her along with fresh bread. "This is more kindness than I have known in a long time," Grisha said softly. "Then the world has been unkind, and that is not right." They ate together as darkness fell completely outside. Harlan found himself watching her, noting the way she savored each bite, the way her pointed ears twitched at sounds from outside, the way she held herself with pride despite everything she'd endured. She was beautiful, he realized. Not in the way human women were beautiful, but in her own right, strong and fierce and unbowed by circumstance. The thought surprised him, and he pushed it away. She was injured and running for her life. The last thing she needed was his attraction complicating her situation. "Tell me about farming," Grisha said suddenly. "Is it satisfying work?" Harlan smiled. "It can be. It is honest work. You plant seeds, tend them, and if you are lucky and work hard, you harvest food. There is a simplicity to it that I appreciate after years of complexity and politics in the army. I know nothing of farming. Orcs are hunters and warriors. Anyone can learn to farm. It just takes patience and willingness to work." She looked thoughtful at that, but didn't respond. They finished their meal in comfortable silence. Afterward, Grisha insisted on helping him clean the dishes despite his protests. As she reached for a pot, she moved wrong and gasped, hand going to her ribs. "Easy," Harlan said, steadying her. "You are still healing." "I hate being weak," she muttered. "You are not weak. You are injured." "There is a difference." He guided her to a chair by the fire. "Sit. Rest while I finish." She obeyed reluctantly, staring into the flames while he cleaned up. When he finished, he found her head had drooped, exhaustion finally claiming her. He fetched a blanket and draped it over her shoulders. She stirred but didn't wake. Harlan settled into the other chair, knowing he should send her back to the barn but unable to make himself wake her. She looked peaceful in sleep, the hard edges of weariness and pain smoothed away. He found himself hoping that whoever came looking for her would be reasonable, would listen to reason. But he knew they wouldn't be. Men who hunted others for sport weren't the reasonable type. He must have dozed off eventually, because he woke to the sound of horses approaching. Dawn light was just beginning to filter through the windows. Across from him, Grisha was awake and alert, her body tense. "Go to the barn," Harlan said quietly. "Stay in the loft and do not come out no matter what you hear. I will not let you face them alone. You are injured and there is a bounty on your head. If they see you, neither of us walks away from this. Go. Now." She held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded and moved quickly out the back door. Harlan watched through the window as she made it to the barn, then turned his attention to the front of the house. 5 riders were approaching, their horses' hooves loud in the quiet morning. Harlan stepped outside to meet them, closing the door behind him. He recognized the type immediately, hired swords with too much confidence and not enough morals. The leader was a broad-shouldered man with a scarred face and hard eyes. "Morning," Harlan said evenly. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" "We are looking for an orc," the leader said, his hand resting casually on his sword hilt. "Female, wounded. She killed a man 2 days ago. Seen anyone like that?" "No," Harlan said. "I live alone here, work my farm, do not get many visitors." The leader's eyes narrowed. "You mind if we look around? Big bounty on this one, 500 gold crowns. We would hate to think you were hiding her." "I do mind, actually. This is my property and you have no authority here." "We have the authority of the king's justice," another rider spoke up. "She murdered a human. That makes her everyone's problem." "The king's justice requires a warrant to search a man's property," Harlan said. "Do you have one?" The leader's smile was ugly. "We do not need papers to hunt monsters, old man. Now are you going to let us search, or are we going to have a problem?" Harlan's hand dropped to his sword hilt. "I am saying this property is mine, and you are not welcome on it without proper authority. Leave. Check the barn," the leader ordered 2 of his men. They dismounted and started toward the barn. Harlan drew his sword in one smooth motion and stepped into their path. "I said leave." The sound of steel being drawn filled the air as all 5 men pulled their weapons. The leader laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "You are going to fight 5 men over an orc. You must be insane, old man." "I am not that old," Harlan said, "and I have fought worse odds than this." He had, actually. During a winter campaign in the mountains, his unit had been ambushed by enemy forces 3 times their number. Only 7 had survived that fight, and Harlan had been one of them. He'd learned that day that skill and experience could overcome numbers if you were willing to be ruthless. The first man to attack him learned that lesson the hard way. He came in with an overconfident swing that Harlan parried easily, redirecting the momentum to throw his opponent off balance. A quick slash across the tendons in the man's sword arm sent him screaming to the ground, his weapon falling from nerveless fingers. The others came at him more cautiously after that. Harlan gave ground slowly, drawing them away from the barn. His old training came back as if he'd never left the army. Read your opponents, watch for openings, never commit fully to an attack that could leave you exposed. Steel rang against steel in the morning air. Harlan caught a blade on his sword and twisted, disarming another opponent. His boot caught the man in the chest, sending him sprawling. But there were still 3 left, including the leader, and he was getting tired. 15 years of farming didn't keep you in the same condition as active military service. A blade got through his guard, slicing across his shoulder. Pain flared hot and immediate, but he couldn't stop. Another strike came from his left. He parried, but wasn't quite fast enough. The blade caught him across the ribs, not deep but enough to draw blood. "Give it up, old man," the leader said, circling him. "You are good, I will grant you that. But you cannot beat us all. Tell us where the orc is, and we will let you live." "I told you," Harlan gasped. "She is not here." The leader nodded to his remaining men. They spread out, preparing for a final rush that Harlan knew he couldn't survive. He braced himself, determined to take at least one more of them down. A roar split the air, primal and full of fury. Grisha emerged from the barn, moving faster than should have been possible with her injury. She'd armed herself with an old axe from his tool shed, and the look in her amber eyes was pure rage. "Get away from him," she shouted. The hunter's attention snapped to her. The leader's face split in a grin. "There you are, little monster. You just earned this farmer a death sentence by showing yourself." "I am the one you want," Grisha said, her voice deadly calm. "Let him go. I will not resist." "No." Harlan started forward, but one of the hunters moved to intercept him. He was too injured, too slow. The blade came at his chest. Grisha moved like lightning, her axe deflecting the strike. She positioned herself between Harlan and the hunters, her injured side toward him, her weapon raised. "Run," she told him over her shoulder. "Please, Harlan, run. I am not leaving you." "Damn your foolish human honor." The hunters attacked together, clearly deciding to overwhelm her with numbers. But they'd underestimated what an orc warrior could do even when injured. Grisha's axe became a blur of motion, deflecting strikes, counterattacking with brutal efficiency. Her movements were different from human fighting styles, more direct, using her natural strength rather than fancy technique. She caught one hunter with the flat of her axe, sending him flying. Her boot connected with another's knee with a sickening crack. But there were still 3 standing, and the wound in her side had started bleeding again. Harlan could see blood seeping through the bandages beneath her shirt. He forced himself upright despite his own injuries and moved to her side. Back to back, they faced the remaining hunters. "This is stupid," Grisha said. "You are going to get yourself killed." "If I am going to die," Harlan replied, "I would rather do it fighting for something that matters." The leader and his 2 remaining men exchanged glances. They'd lost 2 men already, and 2 more were badly wounded. The odds were suddenly much less favorable. "This is not over," the leader spat. "The bounty is 500 gold crowns now. That is enough to bring every mercenary in the kingdom to this farm. You cannot protect her forever, old man." "We will see about that," Harlan said steadily. The hunters gathered their wounded and retreated, but Harlan knew they'd be back, probably with reinforcements. As soon as the sound of hooves faded, Grisha's legs gave out. Harlan caught her before she hit the ground, pain flaring in his own injuries. "I have got you," he said, half carrying her back toward the house. "You idiot," she gasped. "You beautiful, stupid, suicidal idiot. You should have let them take me. Not going to happen." He got her inside and laid her on his bed. The bandages were soaked through with blood, her wound torn open by the fighting. His own injuries would have to wait. He cleaned and re-stitched her wound with hands that shook from exhaustion and blood loss. "Why?" Grisha asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why would you risk everything for me?" "You do not know me. I am nothing to you." Harlan met her eyes as he tied off the final stitch. "You are not nothing. You are someone who saved a child when it would have been easier to look away. You are someone who tried to protect me even though it meant revealing yourself. That makes you worth protecting." Tears leaked from the corners of her eyes, the first he'd seen from her. I will bring death to your door. They will come back with more men. You heard him, 500 gold crowns. That is enough to end you. Then let them come, Harlan said firmly. I said I was done with killing, but I am also done with letting innocent people die when I can do something about it. He cleaned and bandaged his own wounds as best he could with her watching. The shoulder was shallow and the ribs would heal. He'd had worse. When he finished, exhaustion crashed over him like a wave. Rest, Grisha said. Both of us need to recover before they return. Harlan wanted to argue to keep watch, but his body had other ideas. He collapsed into the chair by the bed and darkness took him. When he woke, it was to the smell of food cooking. For a disorienting moment, he thought he was still dreaming. Then he registered the pain in his shoulder and remembered everything. He lurched upright and immediately regretted it as his wounds protested. Be careful, Grisha said from the kitchen area. She was at the stove stirring something in a pot. You lost more blood than you think. You should be resting, he said, his voice rough. I rested. And then I woke to find you passed out and both of us in need of food. She ladled soup into bowls and brought them to the table. Sit, eat. We need our strength for what is coming. Harlan sat and took a spoonful of the soup. It was good, simple, but flavorful. Where did you learn to cook? My mother taught me before she died. She said a warrior needs to know how to survive alone, and that means more than just swinging a weapon. Grisha sat across from him, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at her stitches. We need to talk about what happens next. We hold this farm, Harlan said firmly. This is defensible ground. The house is solid stone and the barn has good sight lines. You are talking about a siege. I am talking about making this too costly for bounty hunters to justify. If enough of them die trying to take you, eventually the bounty will not be worth the risk. Grisha shook her head. You have thought about this. I have. I spent 15 years learning how to defend positions against superior numbers. This farm can be held if we are smart about it. Why, Harlan? She reached across the table and grasped his hand. Her grip was strong, her skin warm. Tell me the real reason. Not the noble talk about protecting the innocent. Tell me true. He looked at their joined hands, green skin against his own weathered tan. The answer came to him with startling clarity. Because in all my years of killing and dying for causes I did not truly believe in, I never once felt like I was doing the right thing. But this protecting you, this feels right. This feels like something worth fighting for. Her amber eyes searched his face. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you have honor. I know you are brave. I know you chose compassion when it cost you everything. He squeezed her hand gently. That is enough. Something shifted in her expression, the hard walls she'd built around herself cracking just slightly. I have never met a human like you. I have never met an orc like you. They finished their meal in silence, but it was different now. Charged with something neither of them was quite ready to name. Afterward, they turned to practical matters. Harlan showed her his small arsenal swords, bows, and the old crossbow he'd kept from his army days. They spent the rest of the day preparing the farm for defense. Harlan reinforced the doors and shutters. Grisha, despite her injury, helped him move supplies into the house so they could withstand a siege if necessary. They worked well together, Harlan realized. She anticipated what needed to be done without being told, and she never complained despite the obvious pain she was in. As the sun set on their second day together, they stood on Harlan's porch looking out over the farm. In the fading light, it was almost possible to pretend that nothing was wrong, that they were just two people enjoying a peaceful evening. It is beautiful here, Grisha said softly. I can see why you chose this place. It reminded me of home, Harlan said. The farm I grew up on before the war. My father worked wheat fields just like these. Where is your family now? Gone. My father died in the early years of the war. My mother followed a year later. I think her heart broke when he died. There was just me and I was off fighting, so the farm was sold." He paused. "What about you? Any family besides the clan that cast you out?" "No. My parents died when I was young. The clan raised me, trained me to fight. They were all the family I knew until they decided honor mattered more than mercy." Bitterness crept into her voice. "I thought they would understand. I thought saving that child was the right thing to do. It was. They did not agree. Then they were wrong." She looked at him, and in her eyes he saw gratitude and something deeper, something that made his heart beat faster. Before he could analyze it, she turned away. "We should rest," she said. "I will take first watch. Your injury is healing. Orc constitution, remember, I will be fine. You need sleep more than I do right now." He wanted to argue but couldn't. His body was screaming for rest. He agreed to wake him in a few hours, then retreated to his bed. As he drifted off, his last sight was of Grisha silhouetted against the window, standing guard over his home and his life. The attack came 3 days later. They saw the dust cloud from riders approaching from miles away. Harlan counted at least 15 men, maybe more. The bounty had drawn exactly the kind of attention he'd feared. "We could still run," Grisha said. They were standing in the farmhouse, weapons ready. "Head into the mountains. They might not follow." "They would follow," Harlan said grimly, "and we would be on the run forever. No, we make our stand here." The riders surrounded the farm, staying just out of crossbow range. A man rode forward, better dressed than the mercenaries Harlan had fought before. He carried a scroll and a banner of parley. "I will speak with them," Harlan said. "Not alone you will not." They walked out together to meet the messenger. Up close, Harlan could see the man wore the colors of the regional magistrate. This was official business now, not just bounty hunters. "I am here on behalf of Magistrate Aldwin," the man said, unrolling his scroll. "There is a criminal wanted for the murder of a human citizen hiding on this property. You are hereby ordered to turn over the orc known as Grisha to face justice. Failure to comply will result in charges of harboring a fugitive and aiding a murderer." "She acted in self-defense," Harlan said. "The men who attacked her were hunting her for sport. She had every right to defend herself." "That is for a court to decide. Turn her over and you will not face charges." "No," the messenger blinked. "I do not think you understand the situation. There are 15 armed men prepared to take her by force if necessary." "You are one man, too," Grisha interrupted. "You face two." "An orc's testimony means nothing in human courts," the messenger said dismissively. "Farmer, be reasonable. You cannot win this fight." "Maybe not," Harlan said. "But I can make it costly enough that you will wish you had gone somewhere else. I spent 15 years in the king's army. I know how to kill efficiently, and I know how to fortify a position. Your 15 men might take this farm, but I guarantee at least half of them will not survive the attempt. Are you willing to pay that price?" The messenger's face paled slightly. He looked at Harlan's scars, his bearing, the cold certainty in his eyes. Whatever he saw there made him reconsider. "I will convey your message to the magistrate," he said stiffly. "But know this, you are making yourself an enemy of the crown." "The crown can come take its chances with everyone else," Harlan said. The messenger retreated. The riders held their positions, clearly waiting for orders. Harlan and Grisha returned to the house. "You realize what you have done," Grisha said. "You have declared yourself an outlaw. There is no going back from this." "I know." "Why?" She grabbed his arm, forcing him to face her. "Why would you throw away your life, your farm, everything you have built, for me?" Harlan looked at her, really looked at her. These past few days, he'd watched her move through his home, had shared meals with her, had fought beside her. He'd learned that she hummed while she cooked, that she had a quick wit and a sharp mind, that she carried sorrow like a weight but never let it break her. He'd learned that her smile was rare but worth waiting for, and that her laugh was like music. He'd learned that he was falling in love with her. Because I would rather live one honest day as an outlaw than a lifetime as someone who turned his back when it mattered, he said quietly. Because you matter, Grisha. To me you matter. Her eyes widened, and for a moment neither of them breathed. Then she closed the distance between them and kissed him. It was not gentle or tentative. It was fierce and desperate, full of all the words neither of them had spoken. Her tusks pressed against his lips, her hands fisted in his shirt, and Harlan thought he would happily burn down the world for the right to keep kissing her like this. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Grisha pressed her forehead to his. "You are insane," she whispered. "Completely, utterly insane." "Probably," he agreed. "Does that change anything?" "No," she kissed him again, softer this time. "If we survive this, we will talk about exactly how insane we both are for feeling this way." "When we survive this," Harlan corrected. A shout from outside interrupted them. The riders were moving, forming up for an attack. Harlan and Grisha took their positions, him with the crossbow at the window, her with a bow near the door. They'd spent the past days preparing for this, and now it was time to see if their preparations were enough. The first wave came fast and aggressive, clearly meant to test their defenses. Harlan's crossbow bolt took one rider from his horse before they got close. Grisha's arrows accounted for 2 more. The rest reached the house and began trying to break down the door and shutters, but Harlan had reinforced everything with iron bars and heavy timber. The wood held, and from inside, he and Grisha could fire through narrow slits they'd cut, picking off attackers who got too close. The first assault broke after 10 minutes, leaving 3 men dead and 2 wounded. "They will try fire next," Harlan said, reloading his crossbow. He was right. The second wave came with torches, trying to set the house ablaze. But Harlan had prepared for this 2 buckets of water positioned at every window, and he'd soaked the wooden shutters in water that morning. The fires caught but didn't spread, and arrows from inside drove the attackers back before they could sustain the effort. The third assault was more cautious. The attackers had learned respect for their defenses. They used shields and approached from multiple directions, trying to divide their attention. It nearly worked. Grisha was focused on the eastern approach when a group breached the barn and tried to flank them from that direction. Harlan saw them coming and shifted positions, his crossbow taking down the leader, but there were too many. They were going to make it to the house. Grisha vaulted through the window, landing among them with her axe swinging. She was magnificent and terrifying, moving with the grace of a born warrior. Her weapon rose and fell, each strike precise and devastating. She fought like someone with nothing left to lose, driving them back through sheer ferocity. Harlan provided covering fire, his bolts taking down anyone who tried to flank her. Together they broke the assault. The surviving attackers retreated in disorder, leaving their dead behind. As the sun began to set, an uneasy quiet fell over the farm. Harlan counted 8 bodies scattered around his property. 8 men who'd come to collect a bounty and would never go home. The weight of it settled over him like a shroud. Grisha climbed back through the window, bleeding from a dozen small cuts but otherwise intact. She collapsed against the wall, breathing hard. "That was the stupidest thing I have ever seen," Harlan said, checking her wounds. "None were serious, just the price of close combat. It worked, did it not? You could have been killed. So could you?" She caught his hands, stilling their worried movement. "We protect each other, that is what this is now." He wanted to argue but found he couldn't. She was right. Somewhere in the past few days they'd become a unit, each watching the other's back, each willing to die for the other. It was insane and beautiful and absolutely terrifying. As darkness fell, they waited for the next assault. It didn't come. Apparently, losing 8 men was enough to give even the most determined bounty hunters pause. They kept watch through the night, taking turns sleeping in short shifts. Dawn came gray and cold. The riders were still there, surrounding the farm but keeping their distance. No one approached with a parley flag. They were settling in for a siege, Harlan realized. They'd try to starve him out rather than lose more men in direct assaults. "We have maybe 2 weeks of supplies if we ration carefully," Harlan told Grisha. "Water is not a problem, the well is inside the property, but eventually we will have to make a choice." "What choice? We try to break through their lines and run, or we wait for reinforcements that may never come." Grisha was quiet for a long moment. "Or I surrender myself." "No, Harlan, no." He moved to stand in front of her. "I am not letting you sacrifice yourself. We will find another way." "What other way? You heard the messenger. You are now an outlaw. Even if we escape, where would we go?" "You cannot return to this life. Then we will build a new life." He took her hands in his. Together. She stared at him, hope and disbelief warring in her amber eyes. "You would do that? Give up everything you have built here?" "I would give up everything for you," Harlan said simply. "These past days, having you here, fighting beside you, talking with you, I have been happier than I have been in years. Maybe ever. You make me feel alive again, Grisha. If I have to choose between this farm and you, there is no choice. It will always be you." Tears spilled down her green cheeks. "How can you say that? We have known each other less than a week." "I know, it is insane, but it is also true." He wiped her tears away gently. "I am in love with you. I do not know when it happened, but it did. And if you feel even a fraction of that, then we will find a way to survive this together." "I do," she whispered. "I feel all of it. When I am with you, I feel like I finally found the place I was supposed to be, like all the wandering and pain led me to your farm for a reason." She laughed through her tears. "I thought I was broken, but you make me feel whole." Harlan kissed her, pouring everything he felt into it. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "Then we fight," he said, "and we survive, and we build the life we both deserve." "Together," she agreed. They spent the day reinforcing their defenses and rationing their supplies more carefully. The siege held steady, the riders keeping their distance but making it clear they were not leaving. As the sun set, Harlan was checking the northern perimeter when he heard the sound of more horses approaching. His heart sank. More bounty hunters, drawn by the reward. How many could they fight before their luck ran out? But when the riders came into view, they were flying different colors. Not mercenaries or magistrates' men, these were military riders. Royal cavalry from the capital. A full patrol unit, maybe 30 strong. The magistrates' men seemed as confused as Harlan. The patrol rode straight to the siege line, and an officer dismounted to speak with the messenger. Harlan could not hear their conversation, but he saw the messenger's agitation, the officer's stern expression. After a few minutes, the officer remounted and rode toward Harlan's house. He came alone, hands visible and empty. Harlan met him at the property line, Grisha standing behind him. "Are you Harlan Wright?" the officer asked. "I am. Captain Marcus Holden, 1st Royal Cavalry. I am here on the direct orders of the king." Harlan's confusion must have shown because the officer allowed himself a small smile. 5 days ago, a letter arrived at the palace. It was from a village on the southern border, signed by the mayor and 12 families. The letter concerned an orc woman who saved a child's life during the final days of the war, a child who would have died if not for that orc's intervention. The child's name is Emma Hartley. She is now 7 years old, and her parents wanted the king to know about the orc who showed mercy when she could have shown cruelty. Grisha made a small sound behind him. Harlan reached back and took her hand. The king was moved by the story, Captain Holden continued. He issued a full pardon for the orc in question, one Grisha of the Ironwood clan. He also ordered an investigation into the circumstances of her alleged crime. We learned about the hunters, about the bounty. The king was not pleased that his justice was being used to reward what amounted to murder. "A pardon," Grisha whispered, "full and unconditional. The bounty has been rescinded and the hunters have been ordered to disperse. Magistrate Aldwin has been removed from his position for overstepping his authority." The captain looked at Harlan. "As for you, there were some who wanted you charged with obstruction. But the king noted that you are a decorated veteran who served with honor for 15 years. He decided that a man who would risk everything to protect an innocent deserves recognition, not punishment." Harlan felt like the ground had shifted beneath his feet. "We are free to go. You are free, full stop. The king suggests you might consider moving to the capital. There is work for a veteran of your skills in the Royal Guard, and the city is more accepting of mixed relationships." Captain Holden's expression softened. "But that is your choice. You have served enough, Harlan Wright. You have earned the right to live your life as you see fit." The captain saluted and rode back to his men. Within an hour, the siege was broken. The magistrate's men and bounty hunters dispersed, some grumbling but none willing to challenge royal authority. By the time the sun set, Harlan and Grisha stood alone in the farmyard, watching the last riders disappear over the horizon. "We are free," Grisha said, as if testing the words. "We are free," Harlan confirmed. He turned to face her, taking both her hands. "So now the question is, what do we do with that freedom?" "I do not know," she admitted. "I have been running for so long, I never thought about what I would do if I could stop. Then let me make a suggestion." He dropped to one knee and her eyes went wide. "Grisha, I know this is fast. I know we have only known each other a handful of days. But in that time, you have become the most important person in my world. I do not want to build a new life, I want to build our life, together. Will you marry me?" For a long moment, she just stared at him, tears streaming down her face. Then she pulled him to his feet and kissed him so hard their teeth clicked together. "Yes," she said against his lips. "Yes, you beautiful, insane, perfect human. Yes, I will marry you." They held each other as the stars came out, two people who had been lost finding home in each other's arms. Later, they would talk about practical matters, whether to stay at the farm or move to the capital, how to navigate a world that did not always approve of their love. But for now, they just held on, grateful to be alive and together. The wedding took place 6 weeks later in the small village 3 miles from Harlan's farm. The local priest had been initially hesitant about marrying a human and an orc, but Captain Holden had remained in the area with some of his men, and his presence along with the royal pardon smoothed over objections. To Harlan's surprise, several of his neighbors attended. They were cautious but curious, and seeing Grisha poised and beautiful in a simple dress they'd purchased in town seemed to challenge their preconceptions. One farmer even approached her after the ceremony. "My daughter was sick last winter," he said gruffly. "She still talks about the day an orc woman stopped by our farm with herbs that broke her fever. That was you, was it not?" Grisha nodded. "I was passing through. I heard the child coughing. You saved her life." The farmer's eyes were wet. "I am glad you are staying in our community. We need more folk who care about helping others." Other stories emerged in the following weeks. Grisha had apparently passed through the area multiple times during her wandering, and each time she'd left small acts of kindness in her wake: a repaired fence, game left for a struggling family, a child's lost toy returned. People remembered, and slowly, acceptance grew. They decided to keep the farm. It was Harlan's home, and Grisha had grown to love the land and the work. She learned to plant and harvest alongside him, and her orc strength made many tasks easier. The wheat grew tall and golden under their care, and their first harvest together was bountiful. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and watch the sunset, talking about everything and nothing. Grisha taught Harlan words in the orc language, and he taught her the old songs his mother used to sing. They laughed together, worked together, and slowly built the life they'd both dreamed of but never thought they could have. One evening, about 3 months after their wedding, a visitor arrived at the farm. An orc woman, older and scarred from many battles. She stood at the property line, waiting to be acknowledged. Grisha froze when she saw her. "That is Garna," she whispered to Harlan. "She was second in command of my old clan." They approached together. Garna looked at Grisha with an unreadable expression. "I heard you had settled here," Garna said. "I needed to see for myself." "Why?" Grisha asked, her voice wary. "Because the clan was wrong." Garna's words came out harsh, as if admitting this cost her. "I have thought about that day often, about the child you saved. About how we cast you out for showing mercy. The chief is old and set in his ways, but some of us have started questioning. When word came that you had been pardoned by the human king for your compassion, that you had found a human willing to die defending you, it made us think." "What are you saying?" Grisha asked. "I am saying the world is changing, and clans that do not change with it will die out. I am saying that maybe there is another way to be strong besides constant warfare. I am saying," Garna paused, then dipped her head in a gesture of respect that Harlan recognized as significant among orcs. "I am saying I am sorry, and that if you ever wish to return to the clan, there are those who would welcome you." Grisha was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was steady. "I appreciate you coming here, I appreciate the apology, but this is my home now and Harlan is my family. I chose a different path and I am happy with that choice." Garna nodded slowly. "I understand. But know that you have friends among the clans if you ever need them." And she looked at Harlan. "Your human has earned respect among our people. Word of his stand has spread. It is not every day someone chooses honor over survival." "He chooses honor over everything," Grisha said, pride clear in her voice. "It is who he is." After Garna left, Grisha was quiet for a long time. Harlan gave her space, understanding she needed to process what had happened. Finally, as they prepared for bed that night, she spoke. "I never thought I would get an apology," she said. "I thought I would carry that rejection forever." "How does it feel?" Harlan asked. "Like closing a door I did not realize was still open." She turned to him, and there was peace in her eyes. "I do not need their acceptance anymore. I have yours, and I have this life we built. That is enough. More than enough." He pulled her close, grateful once again for the day blood had led him to his barn and changed his life forever. Spring turned to summer, and summer to fall. The farm thrived under their care, and slowly, the community that had once been wary began to embrace them. Children would run up to Grisha in town, excited to hear her stories about orc traditions. She began teaching some of the older boys and girls basic self-defense, showing them how to move and fight with confidence. The parents appreciated having their children learn from someone so clearly skilled. Harlan found himself invited to help with community projects, barn raisings, harvest festivals, preparations for winter. People valued his experience and leadership, and he discovered he enjoyed being part of a community again after so many years of solitude. One afternoon in late autumn, as they worked together bringing in the last of the harvest, Grisha paused and put her hand on her stomach. Harlan noticed immediately. "Are you all right?" he asked, concerned. She looked at him with wonder in her amber eyes. "I think I might be pregnant." The world seemed to stop. Harlan crossed to her in 3 strides and took her hands. "Are you sure?" "Not completely. But I have been tired lately, and this morning I was sick. I have heard that mixed children are rare but not impossible." Her voice was tentative, almost afraid. "How do you feel about that?" Harlan's answer was to pick her up and spin her around, laughing with pure joy. When he set her down, he kissed her thoroughly. "I feel like the luckiest man who ever lived," he said. "A child, our child. Grisha, this is I do not have words." She laughed, her earlier uncertainty melting away. "We should see the healer in town to be certain, and we will need to prepare. Neither of us knows what to expect from a half-orc, half-human child." They visited the healer the next day, an older woman named Marta who had been one of the first in the community to accept their marriage. She confirmed Grisha's suspicion with a knowing smile. "You are about 2 months along, I would say," Marta told them. "As for what to expect, I have heard of such children, though I have never delivered one myself. They tend to be healthy and strong, taking the best traits from both parents. You should expect a normal pregnancy, though the birth may be easier than for pure human mothers given orc constitutions." Harlan and Grisha left the healer's home in a daze of happiness. They spent the evening making plans, talking about names and what kind of life they wanted for their child. A life of acceptance, they agreed. A life where their child could be proud of both halves of their heritage. "Do you think our child will face prejudice?" Grisha asked as they lay in bed that night, her head on Harlan's chest. "Probably," Harlan said honestly, "but they will have us to teach them how to stand strong. And they will have this community, which has learned that judging people by their race rather than their character is foolish. Times are changing, Grisha. Slowly, but they are changing. Our child will be part of that change." "I hope so," she said softly. "I want them to grow up in a world better than the one we knew." "Then we will work to make that world," Harlan promised. Winter arrived with gentle snowfalls that blanketed the farm in white. They spent the cold months preparing for the baby. Harlan built a cradle from oak wood, and Grisha sewed blankets and tiny clothes. Neighbors dropped by with gifts and advice, their initial curiosity about the pregnancy giving way to genuine excitement. The first time Harlan felt the baby kick, he cried. He was kneeling beside Grisha, his hand on her swelling stomach, when he felt the flutter of movement. This tiny life they had created together, against all odds, was real and growing stronger every day. "Hello, little one," he whispered to her stomach. "I am your father, and I promise you are going to be so loved." As winter gave way to early spring, Grisha grew restless. "I feel like I should be doing more," she complained one morning, "preparing somehow." "You are growing a whole person inside you," Harlan pointed out. "I think that counts as doing something." She threw a pillow at him, but she was smiling. The baby came on a bright morning in late spring, arriving with surprising speed. Harlan ran to fetch Marta while Grisha's contractions intensified, and by the time they returned, Grisha was ready. The birth was indeed easier than a purely human delivery. Marta commented that she'd never seen a mother so strong through labor. When their daughter finally arrived, red-faced and wailing, both parents wept. She was perfect. Her skin was a pale green, lighter than Grisha's but clearly marking her heritage. Tiny tusks were just visible in her gums. Her eyes, when they opened, were a striking hazel. Harlan's brown mixed with Grisha's amber. She had a full head of dark hair and lungs that could wake the whole county. "She is beautiful," Grisha said, exhausted but glowing. "She is absolutely perfect. What should we name her?" Harlan asked, unable to take his eyes off his daughter. They had discussed names for months but never quite settled on one. Now, holding her, the answer seemed obvious. "Hope," Grisha said. "Her name is Hope." Harlan nodded, feeling the rightness of it. "Hope Wright." "Welcome to the world, little one." The community's response to Hope was everything they could have wished for. People came from all over the area to meet the baby, bringing gifts and congratulations. Children were fascinated by her small tusks, and adults marveled at how she seemed to have inherited strength from her mother and curiosity from her father. Captain Holden, who had remained in the area and become a friend, rode out to meet Hope when she was a month old. "She is going to change things," he said, watching the baby sleep. "She is proof that orcs and humans can build a future together. The king will want to hear about this." "She is not a political statement," Harlan said firmly. "She is our daughter." "She is both," Holden replied. "And that is not a bad thing. The world needs to see that there is another path forward besides hatred and division." As Hope grew, she proved to be exactly the force of nature they'd expected. She was walking before her first birthday, running shortly after. She had her mother's fearlessness and her father's kindness. She spoke early, picking up both human language and the orc words Grisha taught her. By the time she was 2, she was a fixture in the village, beloved by everyone who met her. One summer evening, when Hope was 3 years old and playing in the yard while her parents watched from the porch, Grisha leaned against Harlan's shoulder. "Do you remember the day we met?" she asked. "Every detail," Harlan said. "You were bleeding in my barn, convinced I was going to kill you. And you stitched me up instead." She shook her head wonderingly. "If someone had told me that morning that I would find a home, a husband, and a child before the year was out, I would have said they were insane." "It was insane," Harlan agreed. "All of it. Falling in love in a handful of days, defending you against an army, building this life together. Completely, utterly insane. But worth it." He kissed her temple. "Every single moment." They watched Hope chase butterflies through the garden, her laughter ringing across the farm. This life they'd built one day, one choice, one act of kindness at a time was everything Harlan had never known he wanted. It was messy and complicated, and sometimes still difficult. There were people who disapproved of their marriage, who whispered behind their backs or made comments about their daughter. But there were far more who had learned to see past old prejudices, who recognized that love and family transcended race. "I got a letter today," Grisha said. "From Garna." Harlan raised his eyebrows. "What did it say?" "The old chief died. The clan has chosen new leadership, younger orcs who remember my exile and disagreed with it. They asked if I would consider coming to speak with them about building bridges between orc clans and human settlements." "Not to rejoin," she added quickly. "They understand this is my home, but as a liaison of sorts." "What do you want to do?" She considered for a moment, watching their daughter. "I think I want to say yes, not just for me, but for Hope. I want her to know both sides of her heritage. I want her to grow up in a world where she does not have to choose between being part orc or part human. She can just be herself." "Then we will do it together," Harlan said. "All 3 of us. We will build those bridges." The next morning, they began drafting a response to Garna's letter. It was the start of something new, not just for them, but for the entire region. Over the following years, Harlan and Grisha would become ambassadors of sorts, helping to broker peace talks between human settlements and orc clans, showing both sides that coexistence was possible. But that was all in the future. For now, as the sun set over their farm and Hope finally tired herself out enough to be carried inside for bed, they were simply a family. A farmer who had chosen compassion over safety, an orc who had never given up on doing the right thing, and a child who represented the best of both their worlds. Let them come. Harlan had said that day when he'd learned about the bounty, and they had come bounty hunters, magistrates, armies. But in the end, what had won was not violence or hatred. It was love. It was the simple, revolutionary choice to see another person's humanity and to fight for it even when the cost was high. That night, after Hope was asleep and they lay in their bed listening to the sounds of the farm settling around them, Grisha spoke into the darkness. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For seeing me. Not an orc, not a monster, not a bounty, me." Harlan pulled her closer. "Always. Until my last breath and beyond." She kissed him, and in that kiss was everything they'd been through and everything they'd built together. Outside, the wind whispered through the wheat fields. In the barn, their horses settled for the night. And in the small room down the hall, their daughter dreamed of butterflies and adventures, safe in the knowledge that she was loved. Years would pass. Hope would grow into a strong, brave woman who would do even more to unite the divided races. Other families, inspired by the Wrights, would form their own mixed households. The world would slowly, painfully, learn that the barriers between peoples were built on fear and sustained by ignorance, and that they could be torn down by courage and love. But it all started here, on a small farm where a bounty had been placed on a man's head for harboring an orc, and where he'd said 5 words that changed everything. Let them come. They had come. And they had found something they hadn't expected: proof that the best parts of humanity weren't defined by race or species, but by the choices people made. The choice to help instead of harm, to protect instead of persecute, to love instead of hate. As Harlan drifted off to sleep with his wife in his arms and his daughter safe down the hall, he thought about the man he'd been before that morning when he'd found blood in his wheat field. Lonely, isolated, going through the motions of life without really living. And now he was home. Truly, completely home. The farm would stand for generations, a symbol of what was possible when people chose courage over comfort. Travelers would stop and ask about the place where the farmer had defied an army for love of an orc, and they'd leave with the story warming their hearts and challenging their assumptions. But for Harlan and Grisha, it was never about making a statement or changing the world. It was simpler than that. It was about choosing each other every day, no matter what the cost. It was about building a family in a world that said they shouldn't exist. It was about planting seeds, literal and metaphorical, and nurturing them until they grew into something beautiful. The bounty had brought hunters to their door, but love had sent those hunters away, defeated not by swords but by the sheer stubborn refusal of 2 people to let fear dictate their lives. And in the end, that was the only victory that mattered. Years later, when Hope was grown and had children of her own playing in the same fields where she'd chased butterflies, she would ask her parents to tell the story again. The story of how they met, how they fell in love, how they chose to stand together when the whole world seemed arrayed against them. And every time, Harlan would hold Grisha's hand, now weathered by years of farm work, but still strong and warm, and he would start the same way. "The moment I saw the blood trail leading through my wheat field, I knew my quiet life was about to end." Then Grisha would pick up the thread. "I thought he would kill me. I was prepared to die. But instead he gave me a reason to live." And Hope would listen, even though she'd heard it 100 times, because it was her story too. The story of how love conquered fear, how compassion defeated hatred, and how one farmer's simple choice to help a stranger had rippled outward to change an entire world. But that evening, as the sun set on their farm and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they were just Harlan and Grisha. A man and a woman who'd found each other against impossible odds and built something beautiful from the wreckage of their pasts. They sat on their porch, hand in hand, and watched the land they'd worked together for years settle into nighttime quiet. "I love you," Harlan said, not for the first time and not for the last. "I love you too," Grisha replied. "Forever." And in that moment, on that small farm on the border between human lands and orc territories, the future was born. Not the grand future of politics and treaties and world-changing events, though those would come, but the smaller, more important future of a family choosing love every day, of a home built on acceptance and trust, of a world made better one kind choice at a time. The bounty might have brought them together, but it was love that made them family. And that was the only ending that mattered. The wheat would grow again next season, golden and tall. Hope would bring her own children to help with the harvest, mixing human and orc traditions into something new and beautiful. And somewhere, in another town, another person would make the choice to help instead of harm, inspired by the story of the farmer who'd said, "Let them come," and meant it. The story would live on, growing and changing like the wheat in the field, but always coming back to the same truth. That love is worth fighting for, that compassion is strength, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose to see the person behind the prejudice. Harlan and Grisha had made that choice, and in doing so, they'd built something that would outlast them both, a legacy of love in a world that desperately needed it. As the stars wheeled overhead and the farm settled into the quiet peace of night, they remained on the porch, holding each other, grateful for every moment they'd been given and every choice that had led them here, together. Home, forever.